so much for joining, and thank you for organizing this event. And I can speak a little bit, yeah, to the first question. So, um, you know, it's not exactly something I planned on doing. I wasn't even sure, I think, exactly what a think tank was before. Um, yeah, I think it was probably at an embarrassingly late point in time that I found out what a think tank was. But um, I spent some time on the Hill. I spent some time doing State Department internships, and especially when I was at the embassy in Berlin, we relied a lot on studies from a German think tank for some of the work that we were doing. Sending cables back to Washington, for example, and that resource came in. Was so handy to us that ultimately I looked into the organization through that context, and ultimately joined that same organization in its DC office when I was in Washington a few years later. So it was kind of sort of random how I got into that field, but ultimately, I would say post UNC, I've only spent time in the think tank community. So we'll get more into what the details are, but I'll go ahead and pass along.
Yeah, I can jump in next. Hi, everyone. My name is Imani Augustus. I am the director of the Center for Entrepreneurial Opportunity. We are a national initiative launched by the National Urban League and a Washington, D.C. based think tank called Third Way. In my role, we work to build advocacy, coalitions and advance policies that help to eliminate barriers for women and minority entrepreneurs. I've been at this Third Way, the think tank, since 2022. And prior to that, I worked on Capitol Hill, overseeing committee work at the House Financial Services Committee and the House Small Business Committee. So I'm excited to talk with you more about what my current role looks like and the kind of opportunities that we get to be a part of.
Okay, good morning. My name's Cait Dallaire. I graduated from UNC in 2010, and I went to work actually for an immigration law firm for many years after that. I married my college sweetheart, who I also met at Carolina, and we had 3 kids. And then I went back to grad school and got my master's in international security and joined the State Department as a foreign affairs officer covering international organizations and UN Security Council issues. While I was at the State Department, I was consuming a lot of work produced by think tanks, and I also just realized that there was an opportunity in the think tank world to take a beat and get deep on certain issues that we don't always have the chance to explore when we're responding to crises. Kind of back to back to back. So I decided to leave the State Department in 2024 and join the think tank where I am now. It's called the New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. It's a DC-based, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. And there, I'm leading our efforts to develop youth-informed, youth-inclusive foreign policy. And I'm also an adjunct professor teaching in our master's program on strategy and policy. So that's me in a nutshell.
So Mia, Brandon, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I think I misunderstood the question. So I'll back up a little bit. Briefly, I'm from Charleston, South Carolina originally. I went to the Citadel for my undergraduate degree. I'm one of these Germany folks, have spent a lot of time in Germany, did Fulbright there, did other German academic exchange service programs there. Came to UNC for my master's, was sadly only in town for about 10 months, was only there for a year. It was a dual program. I spent a year at UNC and a year in Berlin, Germany. It's the transatlantic master's program. And of course, I'm happy to talk with any of you if you're ever interested in that program itself. Did State Department internships, spent some time on the Hill, and when I finished my master's, I moved back to Washington with this German-based think tank. So they have a DC office. I spent a few years there and then transferred to Berlin. So I do work in Germany in the German language every day, which is also interesting to talk about. But yeah, so work for a German think tank, and I'm basically, I work in our Europe program, and I'm our U.S. foreign and security policy expert. I look at transatlantic relations and talk about it, write about it, speak about it, that type of thing. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess we can move to the second question, which is sort of, can you walk us through a typical day at work or describe a current project you're working on?
Yeah, I can take that one. I would say a typical day for me, a lot of, if I had to break it up into percentages, I guess. Since I'm the director of my program, I spend a lot of time, probably 30% of my time just in my office doing program planning and strategy. So right now it's October and we are thinking about our work plan for 2026. And so I'm spending a lot of time right now mapping out what key events or moments we want to plan for in the coming year. A lot of what you'll see in DC are, conferences and kind of these fly-in meetings where advocacy organizations or trade groups will come to Washington to kind of lobby their elected officials. And those are really impactful moments for us to plug into the process and, bring constituents that are advocating on issues that are priorities for us, bring those constituents to their representatives. So we're planning around events like the US Mayor's Conference that will happen in January. We're planning around the Congressional Black Caucus annual legislative conference that happens in September, October, and what members we might want to partner with, what topics we may want to have panels on. We also do probably, 30% of my time is participating in convenings that we host. So this year we hosted a convening with our corporate partner, Amazon, in Wilmington, Delaware, where we talked with small businesses in a roundtable around digital literacy and AI and technology adoption. So thinking about what cities we may want to go to next year and what topics of conversation we want to have. And I think the last kind of 40% of my role is just writing and research. So we do a lot of unpacking census data from the Federal Reserve to think about how small businesses are responding to different challenges. So right now we're really interested in, for example, tariffs and the impact of tariffs on small businesses, how that's affecting their supply chains, how that's affecting the cost to their customers, and different hurdles that business owners are facing in this current political climate.
Yeah, I'll go next. So a typical day, it kind of depends on the day. Certain projects sort of ebb and flow, but just to give you a glimpse, so different think tanks are different. I think we should like back up and say different organizations have different mission, focus, methodology. And so the think tank that I work for, and if you're looking at think tanks, do your research really on kind of not just like the issue that they cover, the issues that they cover, but also how they pursue their work. The organization that I work for is focused on foreign policy issues, but not just for the sake of talking about foreign policy issues, for the sake of producing action prompting, publications, convenings, things like that. So for me, what that looks like is, as I mentioned, I teach in the master's program. So our program includes student fellows who are simultaneously enrolled in our sort of trade school style master's program. And also they are working fellows at the Institute, which is great because they get the opportunity to research, write, and publish with their mentors, hopefully leading to careers with us or with other organizations as foreign policy analysts, practitioners, policymakers in the future. We try to give them like a holistic background for that. So I teach. I also contribute to publications on topics that I choose to research, and then tied to those publications, we always try to do events, convenings, briefings for the Hill, briefings for members of government, convenings in civil society and with other stakeholders. We just did an event on the margins of UNGA, the UN General Assembly High-Level Week in New York, with a couple of other organizations where we talked about youth and AI and all the like security and job concerns that emerge from that. So it's so many things. And I saw a question in the chat about networking, and I know this will come in and we'll speak to it later, but networking is such a big part of what I do on a daily basis too, because everything that I'm doing is about connecting issues and building bridges between people who are interested in similar policy issues and figuring out how we as an organization and I as an individual can advance pragmatic intellectual leadership on the issues that we really want our policymakers nationally and globally to be caring about. So it's, in my view, a great blend of kind of the academic and the policy work space, because you have the opportunity to do the research and get deep on those issues and build coalitions, but you also are doing it to produce something that leads to some sort of action or decision or progress that you're targeting. So a typical day is so many things, and I really enjoy that facet of the work.
Yeah, and I'll wrap this up. So it sounds, my experience sounds a lot like Cait's, to be honest. Very very similar. A lot of diverse days where one day you're doing a certain set of tasks, and the next day you're doing something completely different. A lot of it depends on. I mean, I work in a role where I'm looking at specific policy fields. A lot of U.S. domestic politics, societal developments, U.S. foreign and security policy, developments in transatlantic relations. And again, I'm working for a German organization. So I'm a German-speaking American working in Berlin. And as a result of that, you've probably noticed that there's a lot happening in the United States currently. And there's, you need folks to react and try to explain, especially for German audiences, why this is important. How do Germans? How does the German government, our main target audience is, the German policymaking landscape in Berlin, a bit of Brussels as well. I do work for a Europe program, and essentially, we're trying to help policymakers in particular gain a better understanding of the ways in which the United States is developing and how to respond accordingly. So the way that manifests is, sometimes you're up really early in the morning doing radio interviews in German media, or you get a last minute request to do some sort of TV appearance, and you kind of set things aside for a couple hours and prep for that, or run into the studio real fast. You have, of course, also, kind of, again, it depends on the think tank. I couldn't agree with Cait more. No think tank is exactly the same. But we play that bridge building role. So a lot of track dialogues where we bring, especially in the transatlantic space, Americans and Europeans together to find common understanding on certain issues. Things where, generally we have the funding for it, we have the facilities for it, and that convening role in many ways is a role that think tanks usually do play. Yeah. And contributing to publications, I would say that's one of the big things. So, like, for example, at the moment, I'm working on a policy brief that's focused on U.S. AIDS closure and the implications for the Western Balkans and Eastern Partnership countries. And it's consisted of around 35 interviews with former U.S. aid officials and State Department folks and civil society actors on the ground in these countries. And I'm actually calling from Romania at the moment. I'm sitting in the hotel lobby in Bucharest, where I presented some of the initial findings on a panel earlier today. So always mixed, a lot of moving around, that kind of thing. Back over to you, Rob.
Yeah, so for our next question, what are some of the ways your work has driven real-world policy change?
I can jump in. So at Third Way, what we like to share with people is that we champion left of center ideas, which means that we work with members and advocates who are more in the moderate realm of the Democratic Party. And we specialize in high impact advocacy campaigns. So what that means is our goal in our mission in a lot of our work is to persuade elected officials, subject matter experts, and the media, or anyone with political influence, to either change a policy or change the conversation happening around a policy. And so one of our teams, Third Way has a number of different teams, departments. We've got folks working on climate issues, education issues, And my team with the small business issue area is under the economic program. But some of my colleagues on the education team have been working over the last several years in the past administration on something called college completion. So understanding that the student debt burden is incredible for a lot of graduating students. And we know that it's even more of a burden for students that don't finish their degree. So they're graduating with student debt and they don't have a degree to show for it. And so they're really burdened with paying back those loans. And so instead of focusing on some of the other initiatives of kind of the farther left end of the Democratic Party, which is to forgive student debt or to make college completely free. Third Way instituted a campaign around helping students finish their degree. So however many years that might take, letting the focus be on college completion programs rather than free college or forgiving college debt is trying to help more people get across the finish line. And so one of the successes that they had under the previous administration was in 2021, there was a piece of legislation that actually funded a college completion fund. And so it piloted a program that would let institutions use this money to institute programs on campus that would help students who are at risk of not finishing their degree for whatever personal reasons, help them stay on campus and help them finish out that degree so that they're still graduating with college debt, but they have a higher chance of entering a career or an industry that will be able to support them in paying off that debt. So that's one area that our education team has worked on. And if you're interested in that, I'm happy to connect you to any of our friends.
I can go next. You know, impact is difficult. Impact, I think, is one of the most difficult things with at least for my think tank. We do spend a lot of money on projects. We have a lot of strategy calls, and we have planning that goes out over 3 to 5 years. I would say for our think tank, the ultimate sign of impact is if and it's really difficult. It's if your recommendations end up making it into legislation. That is one of the sort of like top. It doesn't get better than that. The moments where politicians or influential figures in your target audience are citing your studies, are citing the information that you're providing. That is impact, and that happens from time to time. But below that, as a result, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of we use some metrics where maybe it's citations. If you release a study, for example, is that study getting picked up in external media? Are you getting requests for interviews? Are you getting requests to maybe write an op-ed based on your policy brief, or getting invitations from your target audience to come and speak about your work? I would say those are some of the ways in which you can identify impact. I've had success in some cases where we had a publication many years ago it was polling. I was one of the only transatlantic relations polling surveys out there, annual. It's called Transatlantic Trends. And, we had a really strong release strategy. We had the Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, at the time, who, opened our event. We had launch events in Berlin, Paris, and in Turkey, in Istanbul simultaneously. A lot of engagements where that publication got picked up in media. I think it got picked up in the Washington Post in the last year of the publication. We had briefings in the German policy planning unit at the foreign ministry. These are the types of things where you can say that's impact. Now, it's still a little controversial because you're going to have people who say, well, I don't know if that's really that much impact, but that's that's what we generally use. How about you, Cait? How does it look
Yeah,
on your
no,
end?
you're right. It is really tough. I agree with a lot of what you said, and I think I think of it in a couple different ways. There is the visible impact, like, okay, we made these specific recommendations in a report and they were carried over into new legislation. That's awesome. There's also the invisible impact. Like, I know that a report that and this is real, like, I know that a report that I produced did actually reach senior decision makers in government who I don't know how much they actually like considered what I'd written, but at least the fact that had gotten into their hands and factored into the policy discussion, that's a win. Cool. But then there's the whole area in between those two things, which is, as you were saying, Brandon, like just the contribution to the information ecosystem. It's your job at a think tank to contribute to an evolving conversation on your policy issue or issues and to help steer the ship, even if you're just steering it and changing that trajectory by a single degree, because that can have a long-term impact that is difficult to measure at the very beginning. And you're also never the only person talking about the issue. And so by feeding into the information ecosystem in a way that you feel is productive and ethical and strategic, you are contributing, even if you can't directly tie like one event that you did to a particular policy end goal. But it's all about that system.
Nice, awesome. And we can move on to the next question. Thanks for those answers. What skills or experiences from college were most useful in your current role when you sort of think about that? And Cait, do you want to kick us off for this one?
Yeah, I do. Because I actually was thinking about this morning. Okay, so at Carolina, I did a bachelor's in international studies, and I ended up earning a minor in philosophy. And the reason that I earned that minor was just because I was kind of drawn to those courses, and I was so interested in not just like what we've done throughout history, but how people think about these issues, going back to the very earliest discussions that we kind of have on record. And I was thinking, I really feel like it was actually the exercise of really stretching my brain in some of those philosophy courses that prepared me for success in my career, because I'm always thinking about not just what has occurred throughout history or what our current policy position is on an issue, but how we arrived at it, how we think about it, and how we could approach it differently from another angle. And so for me, everything that I did at Carolina that challenged me to think, not just think differently, but actually dig deep into the mechanics of my own brain and my own processing and examine them, that is the kind of skill set that has carried me through and allowed me to approach my career with curiosity, with sort of an entrepreneurial spirit, which is challenging at times, especially when you're working in a bureaucracy, but is really well suited to working in a think tank, in my experience. Um, and just with like a strong sense of my own moral compass. So those are the kinds of experiences that I think prepared me for success.
I can go next. Yeah, where I did my undergrad was not exactly a bastion of like free thinking. It was, it's a military academy, the Citadel. So there wasn't too much space for that there, to be honest. But what they did offer were language courses, and they offered a lot of scholarship opportunities to go abroad. So I took advantage of those and went abroad every summer. I never took a semester off, but I went every summer. Really leaned into the German language courses. I had my eye um, on a couple fellowships after school, and tried to organize my summers in ways abroad where that application would ultimately be strengthened. So thinking, the sort of medium term game. Okay, how do I strengthen my profile to fit the sort of eligibility requirements of these fellowships that I found really interesting. Did Fulbright, which I'd strongly recommend. Look into these post-grad fellowships. They're awesome opportunities, regardless of the think tank space. But those opportunities, I think, really um, propelled me into the space where I am now. Um, and at UNC, which honestly, the academic level was just so much higher to where I did my undergrad. Um, research methodology, that kind of stuff comes in handy later on. So, how do you come up with a proper research question? Yeah, the different ways in which you could conduct analysis that's really taken seriously. Those types of things I really honed in on at UNC. And a plug for one of my favorite professors, Bob Jenkins. If you ever get a chance to take a course with him, strongly recommend it. Very good professor.
Yeah, for me, I would say I did not plan to be in this industry at all. When I was at UNC, I graduated in 2015, and when I was there, I was pre-law. I did major in political science and sociology. I had a minor in philosophy, but it was with the intention of going to law school. All of my summer internships, even my study abroad with Honors Carolina, were all law related. And so I definitely experienced a pivot in my senior year at UNC, wanting to get some work experience. And that's when I came to DC to take an internship on Capitol Hill, which turned into what was supposed to be a gap year, turned into now like a gap 9 years. But what I think some of my experience on campus does have, transferable skills. So the amount of writing I did in my major for philosophy, sociology, really just helped me clarify my writing ability, my ability to create strong, clear, and persuasive arguments, understanding how to communicate my ideas effectively. Those are all things that I use in my job today, especially because I do a lot of public speaking, being able to engage with audiences and be informed when there are debates happening, and being able to write concisely and argue persuasively. That's a skill I use every day. And then I was also involved in programs like the Campus Y. I was involved in some of those social justice programs there. And so I think that helped me develop the ability to see policy or issue areas from multiple perspectives, understanding, that there's a multifaceted approach to different policy areas, and kind of understanding that people and groups have different motivations for political behavior. Those are all things that I think, thinking back now, kind of the roots of that understanding started, in some of my involvement on Campus Y and the conversations I was having with like people from different backgrounds.
Before we move on, can I say one more thing based on a great point that Imani made about writing? Because I think this is something that is in question now as we're seeing AI be able to pick up a lot of tasks for us that we did previously. I think we're all still figuring out how to make AI like a good partner and collaborator and time saver without losing the ability to kind of continue to build all the skills that we need to be successful as thinkers and creators. And I notice even in teaching the course that I'm teaching, that sometimes not only is the product not that great when you use ChatGPT to write your work, we know this, right? But in addition, you miss out on the critical opportunity to process and analyze and refine your own thinking, which only occurs as you are writing. And so I think that's the piece that a lot of us miss. And so I would say, if you want to make yourself not only competitive, but agile and adaptable and a strong candidate for any type of role, especially in a think tank, don't outsource too much of that labor, as annoying as it can be, because so many things are processed, refined, and revealed to you through the process of your writing.
And this will be our final sort of facilitated question. Then we'll open it up after this for you all to ask the questions that are sort of on your mind. And I know the chat has some good ones already. But for the panel, what do you think students can do to stand out and be competitive applicants for roles within think tanks?
I'll go first because I just started that. So yeah, be a good writer. No, work on your writing skills and your communication skills, right? Like you can constantly be refining those. Nobody is just like born an amazing communicator. It's a skill that is honed over time. But I also think, especially when you're early in your career and you maybe have a direction, but you're not quite sure that that's where you're going to remain like focused. You might want to change your direction in the future. I think it makes people really effective, um, uh, contributors at think tanks if they've had experience in other places. And I guess I would say this is true everywhere, but if you have other experiences that you can then kind of mine for insights that you can bring to the organization that are different than other people's, that's great. And that the same it goes for government. If anybody here is considering joining government at some point, like think tank work, government work, NGOs, other like nonprofits and profits and civil society organizations are all part of that ecosystem. And so I think if you can approach the issues you care about from different angles, it makes you a better contributor to the team. And it also makes you a more adaptable and resilient entrepreneur should you find yourself in a position where one door closes and you have to make a pivot.
I can try to go next and try to also build in Lily's question as well, that I think is a really important one, about starting a career at a think tank as well. But yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Cait just said. I think, yeah, it kind of depends on the think tank, but if I to give you it in, like with a specific example, the think tank that I joined ultimately, it's a German think tank, and it has a DC office. That's where I initially started. By that time I'd been in Germany. I spoke German. I had done some internships with the State Department in Germany at the consulate in Dusseldorf and the embassy in Berlin, and was on the Hill at the time. So all of those things together really helped me get my foot in the door for that initial start at the think tank. Starting at a think tank can be helpful, but this is actually one of the bigger pieces of advice I'd give related to think tanks. If you start at a think tank right out of college, it's really good experience. Generally, you're going to come in as some sort of like research fellow, research associate, project assistant, maybe something along those lines, and you'll be attached to some like fellow, somebody who has 20, 25 years of experience in the field, and there you get to a ceiling really quickly, where you start, and then you need to have that experience, especially in your own policy field, because that's what the organization then really benefits from. Think about it. Think tanks, they benefit from thinkers who have had experience really working on the policy. So going into government, going into the private sector, going into areas where not only are you bringing in expertise, you're bringing in your networks. If you worked in the government for 30 years or even 5 years, say a shorter period of time, you know how the sausage is made. You have people on the inside who are still there, and you can call on them for further information like that. So starting out at the think tank is fine, but just also realize that you're probably going to have to leave and do something else in order to come back at a higher level at a later point in time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I actually am wrapping up the final stages of hiring for a policy advisor on my team. And the role of a policy advisor with me looks like someone who manages our relationships on Capitol Hill, contributes to our research and policy development, and also works with our comms advisor to make sure we're marketing our ideas to the best audience. But I mean, quite literally, what I heard both Cait and Brandon saying are, that writing ability is definitely something I ask about. And I look for a diversity of experience and background. So, I mean, quite literally, reading from the phone screen questions that I shared with my applicants, I asked them, how familiar are they with the legislative process and tools? So typically, I'm looking for someone who has experience working on Capitol Hill or in an advocacy capacity. How are they able to navigate stakeholder relationships. I'm asking folks about their research and writing process, about their quantitative skills. And so those are all things that I think you can get when you're in undergrad and through a series of internships. But the people that, the person that I'm hiring for this role is someone who has experience at another research institution. So he's bringing quantitative skills, research and writing for a general broad audience. And he's also very familiar with the legislative process. As in this role, he'll be responsible for developing strategies about how to advance policy priorities with Congress and the administration and the advocacy community. So I'm definitely looking for someone with a variety of background and previous experience, and also someone we have a writing test in our hiring process as well. So we're wanting to make sure that there's a standard of writing ability that's there too. We don't expect you to be a subject matter expert on day one, at least here, for this kind of more junior role. But I would say, all of the directors at Third Way have had some years, 5 to 10 years in the industry that they are studying. And that is definitely something that, you gain from being in the field.
Great. Awesome, thank you. So we'd love to open it up for the questions that you have. And I know some people have put things in the chat, but if you're comfortable, we'd love for you to come off and sort of ask it to them directly. Yeah, Alyssa, if you want to go first, did you raise your hand or?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I guess I was wondering, you kind of all mentioned that like success within think tanks is kind of like driven from the impact that your guys' research has on like policy and like higher up policymakers at the time. I guess like with politics being such a like changing changing field, how do you guys balance like being with the time in politics while also like thorough research and stuff like that?
That's a really good question, and it's similar to the question that I saw Patricia ask in the chat too, about like whether think tanks are facing political obstacles or pressure when trying to push forward with their own policy work. This is why it's really important when you're researching different think tanks to understand like how they're set up and how they're funded. That tells you everything about not only what their positions might be, but who they serve and who they're in response to, or who they might be beholden to, what agenda is aligned with their own. And so I would just say do that research. Some organizations are federally funded and are therefore like impacted by changes to federal funding or federal policy. Some are totally independently funded. And so I think the money tells you a lot. I also think it's important to just maintain, an ethical standard in carrying out your work. And if you're a subject matter expert on a particular issue, like hopefully you can find a way to make that issue appealing to both parties. And that's part of the creative sort of strategic messaging piece of the work as well.
Thank you.
I can jump in as well. I think it's a fascinating question, and I couldn't agree with Cait more. Yeah, looking at the funding structures is really important. It's all on a separate note. Looking at the funding structures is also important because you need to know if this organization has money as well, or has. It sounds ridiculous, but it's really important. What their fundraising looks like actually.
Or if they expect you to bring in the money as part of your job, which is sometimes a part of the job.
Coming back to that network perspective and why that's so important, So I'll give you an example of my company though. It's fascinating because it actually impacts the research that we're able to do controversially in some cases. So Bertelsmann is tied. My organization is tied to one of the largest media conglomerates in the world. It's one of these like hidden champions in Germany. You might be familiar with Vox, Penguin Random House. These U.S. entities are actually owned by this German company. We're actually getting sued at the moment by the current administration for the release of certain books in the US. That's creating some discussions internally about, oh, we have our US office in New York, we have our US based a nonprofit in Washington. What's going to happen to its 501(c)(3) status? Those types of questions. So it luckily hasn't impacted us too much yet, but yeah, tough. And company also engages in a lot of business in the Asia Pacific region in China. Sometimes we've gotten a little bit of mumblings from across the street at the company to be a little careful about how we frame some of our China related work because of the company's interest there. Very much Chatham House. Well, I guess this is being recorded. Please don't send this recording anywhere. But it's a little controversial. But one other thing is, I think to your question, Alyssa, is it makes the job really difficult because especially in this context, as we all know, it's so volatile. The geopolitical tensions, things are changing every other day. And as a result, I find, and I struggle with this myself, I am very much in a reactionary sort of position. I'm constantly getting requests to talk about things that just happened, and trying to keep track of all of that is one difficulty, but it also undermines the medium and long-term strategic work to be able to think about things in the long term. So that is something I'm struggling with as we speak.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, one thing for my work is we, at the end of last year, we kind of had two different plans based on who won the election. And because our work is, so Thirdly has a 501(c)(3), which is nonpartisan, and we just do a lot of education work. Then we have a 501(c)(4) that does a lot of advocacy and political work, and that is more aligned with a particular party. And so, depending on who's in office, is really going to depend on how much momentum we'll have with our policy priorities. And so, we had to completely pivot on our plans. And especially in my work, I focus on kind of DEI and minority and women issues. And so, in the beginning of the year, when that was all being really attacked and kind of under a microscope, we had to be creative about how we framed our conversations and our arguments, and get really creative in how we're persuading people to just be talking about entrepreneurship issues as part of the American dream, and part of economic opportunity, rather than using some other terms that might have been more like cultural buzzwords. And so I think that also impacted our corporate funding. And so a lot of, in the beginning of the year, many of our corporations were thinking about how to pivot their funding mechanisms with the changes to DEI. And fortunately, our partners have stayed on with us, but that was something that we needed to be concerned about, where funding would be coming from if we continued on a mission that had equity and diversity and inclusion as the focus. But we've figured out how to navigate those waters, but that's definitely something that we've had to determine how to kind of pivot in the current political climate.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask?
I'll jump in now because I know I put a couple of them in the chat. So first of all, thank you for speaking with us today. The first question I had asked in the chat, and it's something I've been wondering, is how did networking play a role in your career trajectories? And I know a couple of you already touched on this, but yeah, I know it's super important, and I know there could be barriers of fear and people not getting back to you. So I'm wondering how to make time to send messages or meet with people in person or virtually to talk about professional updates or maybe possible job opportunities, or the like.
Yeah, if you all don't mind, I'll jump in because I do have to hop off in just a couple minutes. So I was able to get my position here at Third Way through a networking opportunity. Like Cait and Brandon mentioned, when I worked in government, I relied on Third Way's research very much when I was on Capitol Hill. And so I was familiar with the organization. I was familiar with my current boss, who is the leader of the economic program. And so, apart from working with him in my professional capacity, he was also someone that I regularly got coffees with, and I spoke with other, legislative directors on Capitol Hill that had used their work before. And so when I learned that Third Way was partnering with the National Urban League to start an effort on small business, I was able to reach out to my current boss and ask him to tell me a little bit more about the project. And he said, "Listen, if you're at all interested in the job, just apply, and we will get you through the process." And so I would definitely echo some of the things that I know my colleagues are going to say in terms of um, treating every opportunity as a way to meet someone and make a connection. I've shared this with people in the past. When I was on Capitol Hill, I used to meet with interns a lot, and they would ask me a similar question. And one of the pieces of advice, or one of the things that folks have done that's really resonated with me, is after I've met with someone, I would keep them updated on my progress. So whether you're still in school and you're finishing a summer internship, reaching out to them every 3 months or so to say, hey, the fall semester is starting, and these are some of the classes I'm excited about taking. I really remember this experience I had working with your office, or this conversation that we had. And so I'm making a connection between, something I did in that internship to what I'm doing now. And just keeping them aware of when you're looking for opportunities, or kind of where your journey takes you. I really enjoy those kinds of updates, and I think that helps to keep you top of mind when opportunities do come up. But I'll let my colleagues take the rest of the questions. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Imani. And I think I would add, Krista, that rather than thinking about networking as a transactional thing, think about it as you are nurturing a vibrant network. This is something where the relationships that you're building, some of them may never yield something back to you, but it's a whole vibrant ecosystem that you're nurturing, and you don't know when it might be really helpful for you to know someone or be able to ask a question or ask for an intro. I wouldn't shy away from asking for the intros that you need, even for just informational interviews, to make yourself a human to someone else, because when we're just submitting applications, it feels so dehumanizing. So if you can talk to somebody at an organization that you're interested in, whether it leads to them considering you more seriously or not, at least you've been seen as a human. You've learned some things through a nuanced conversation, and it may very well lead to them pulling your application out of the stack. I would also say it's a tough time in Washington right now. If you're particularly talking to people in this area, so many people are struggling and are out of a job, and the market is crazy. So you can nurture your network while also being sensitive to the experiences of others, and the fact that if somebody doesn't get back to you, it might just be that they're inundated with requests and it's not personal. So please do not let it deter you. And then the last thing I would say is, how people say dress for the job you want, not the job you have. I really have tried to be seen doing the job that I want, even when I don't have it yet. And so what that meant for me when I was a student in my master's program and really wanting to get into government was I started engaging with issues and sharing and reposting and writing on issues in the foreign policy area that interested me on LinkedIn and other areas before I was ever hired by anyone. I wanted to be seen as a professional already practicing before someone could see me that way. And similarly, I started a podcast when I left the State Department because I'd always wanted to do more comms and more storytelling work. And I have no idea if I'll ever get a podcasting job, but that's something that I wanted to do because I felt like it contributed positively to the conversation, and because I thought this is something I want to do, so I'm going to do what I can to start practicing these skills before someone is going to come and offer me an opportunity. So I think it also can be like really good for the spirit to just be doing things that you care about, even while you're waiting to kind of be seen and recognized or hired to do that work. So get creative, be seen doing the work that you want to be doing, and nurture your network all the time, even when you don't need something from anybody else.
Well, it's easy to go last on this one. I agree with everything everyone said. A few points. Yeah, when you get an opportunity, also do a good job. You know, really take advantage of the opportunities that you're given, because the networks that you have are also being built while you're in the organization itself. And the reason I say that is because I've actually never applied for a job. Can you believe that? It was an internship that was initially with this company. A UNC grad recruited me. We had an initial phone call. I wouldn't really call that an interview, and he brought me on board. Did put a lot of effort in over that summer. And when I finished my master's program, my boss called me and said, "Hey, we have a position here. Please come back," which I did. When I moved to the German side of the company, there was so much behind the scenes networking, positioning, timing, all of that kind of stuff because on the one hand, I had to build capital within my company in Washington who had no interest in me leaving. So I had to get them on board for them to believe, like to support me to go to the German side of the company. Then I had to go to Germany, and they gave me like basically a couple weeks to go there, go to the headquarters, introduce myself, and ultimately one of my bosses facilitated a meeting with the CEO of the company. An hour-long conversation later, and he said, "Oh, we'll make it work. Come on over." So it the internal networking is also really important as well when you're doing this stuff. One detail, the LinkedIn and email exchanges where you're reaching out to somebody you don't know. On the one hand, try to develop, when you speak with somebody, ask them if they have recommendations on people to consult. That way you can point back to saying, "Hey, this person recommended I speak with you." That helps. That's good. Good to see in a message. Two, when you reach out, offer availability, offer times where you say, "This is my availability. These are my time windows." Keep in mind time differences as well. I mean, that type of work I think is really helpful for me, because then I got to go back to you and I got to say, "Hey, definitely interested." And by the way, I always say yes. But when I go back and "Oh, so what is your available?" And then it turns into this like backwards and forwards type of thing. Get some of the initial work done in advance. And the third thing is light persistence. Don't hesitate to reach out again. Unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say this. There was a student who reached out to me in April, and I initially responded, and then things got crazy, and I completely forgot that we'd been in touch. And he just reached out to me this week and said, "Hey, I just wanted to follow up on this front. How does your availability look?" Basically, that was like 6 months ago. And I'm embarrassed, like, to even, I mean, I've responded to him, of course, and like, "Oh my God, sorry, let's meet." Respond way quicker than that. Reach back out, because it's not some guy, it's not some guy or gal being a jerk. It's, as Cait said, people are kind of busy. So just keep at it. It's okay. Keep at it.
That's really good advice. And I would also add, because you just reminded me of this, Brandon, like your advice on what kind of LinkedIn message to send and what to include is so great. And make sure that you've done your homework and that you kind of know what you want to get out of the conversation, because one pet peeve for me is when someone reaches out and it's just like, "Hi, can you help me?" And I'm like, I mean, give me more to work with. Like, have some sense of what your connection is to this person and like why you think a conversation would be valuable.
Does anybody else have any questions that they're sort of wanting to ask?
Just one more thing. I think maybe we could close here if no one else has anything, because there was one more question I asked, and it was that I'm also aware that in DC, people switch organizations, positions, and even interests throughout their career. And I'm getting ready to graduate this semester, so I've been wondering, and especially as I think about the job search, how do you advise that new graduates articulate their interests and career aspirations? Because, for example, I've held a couple of comms internships, but now I want to pivot to research to gain more experience with the quantitative side. And it's like I've also had experience with like researching a podcast and doing that at a previous institution, but never any quantitative stuff, even though I'm doing a capstone. Like, how do you be honest about like skills that like you don't possess or working on possessing as a new college grad?
Yeah, Krista, that's a great question. And it's all about the narrative. And there's some art to this here. Like, no one expects that someone just coming out of school has all the experience that they need to do everything they ever want to do in their career, right? But you want to tell the story of why you're a good fit for this organization. People will respect and admire you acknowledging the areas where you want to grow and how you feel like you can do that in partnership with them. And be creative about mining your past experiences for all the things that really are relevant to what you've done. So maybe it's not like a direct one for one, like you didn't have the same title, but if you had the skills that undergird that work that you acquired through other experiences, be creative and be generous with yourself and be really thoughtful about how you present those skills. But it's a narrative. You're telling the story of you and who you are and where you are on your journey. And that is your best shot at opening doors.
I would agree with that. I think that's probably the most important piece of advice. If you're, yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think don't let the enemy, what is it? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you're able to find opportunities out there that you can, thinking about it, the next step, like how can I sell this experience into something else later? That's also one way to do it. Trying to think of an example. I mean, my uh, decision to go to the Hill was mainly because I knew that would open doors for something later, that it would be good experience in the initial term. I wasn't exactly sure if I wanted to do that, as a career per se, or even initially for a couple years after school. But I knew that it would be helpful, and I knew that it would look good. And still to this day, even though I spent only 4 or 5 months in this office, um, I still go back to that experience, and it's something that's really valued in my space, in my community. So I'll end there. I also have to jump off, Rob. I'm so sorry. Here in a second.
And Krista, also remember you have campus resources to help you practice telling that story. So like I can help you or other career coaches because it's a challenge that most people face when they're first starting. I feel like one last question that sort of was in the like they submitted when they were coming to the event is, are there certain sort of types of degrees that you think are beneficial when someone's thinking about a career in think tanks? Do they think students commonly sort of think there's certain types of graduate programs they should be attending? So from your experience, do you see certain ones that are helpful, or are there different variety of types that could be?
I'll go first briefly, if that's okay, Cait, just because I have to drop off and get this transferred to the airport. So, um, it, 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 there's so many think tanks that cover all sorts of issues. So really, it kind of depends on the field that you're interested in alone. One piece of advice that I'd give from my experience working in the international relations field is studying international relations alone or studying political science alone, that's not enough. It's really helpful if you define a policy field specifically. That you're Cait, the X policy expert, or you're Brandon, the Y policy expert. That I would strongly recommend when you're thinking about studies in that field specifically. Try to develop a policy expertise that accompanies that sort of larger, more general academic field. Thank you so much. It was so good to exchange with you. And if you ever need anything ever, please reach out. And I'm always happy to jump on a call. So thank you so much, Rob and Aspen, for organizing. Thank you all for taking the time. Take care. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brandon. And I guess we'll go ahead and sort of wrap it up, and know that we're going to reach out with sort of their contact information if that's something of interest, following this session. And then obviously we'll have the recording that we can also sort of share out as well. But we really appreciate Cait, Imani, and Brandon taking the time out of their busy schedules to do this, and you all coming and asking such great questions. But thank you so much for attending, and please let me know if you have any questions following up.
Thank you. It was great to